Do you think there are methods that are 100% likely to help you figure out the cheater? It feels like people find out about betrayal absolutely spontaneously. My wife aroused my suspicions, and I wanted to save my marriage with all my might.
My name is Alan Harris, and I'm 36 years old. For the past decade, I've worked as a network manager for a major insurance company in Cincinnati, Ohio. To excel in my role, I must be proactive and think logically to solve problems and ensure our network stays operational. This is crucial, as every minute of downtime costs the company thousands of dollars. I've found that the skills I use at work, anticipating issues and approaching unforeseen challenges with rational thinking, have also helped me manage other aspects of my life. However, recently, I've faced situations that have pushed my ability to stay rational and think clearly. Although I didn't realize it at the time, my troubles began last June when I took my family to Paducah, Kentucky for a wedding. Paducah is my wife, Tracy's hometown, and the bride was her cousin. At the wedding, Tracy reconnected with Jill Tanner, an old high school friend. Jill invited us to meet her and her husband, Frank, for drinks that evening. After the reception, Tracy and I left our 9-year-old son, Matthew, and 7-year-old daughter, Lisa, with her parents and headed out to meet Tracy's friends. Since I wasn't familiar with Paducah, Tracy gave me directions to Brian's barn, where Jill and Frank were waiting. Brian's barn was not just the name of the place, but also an accurate description. It was a bar set in a restored barn. As we walked in, we found ourselves in a large room with a circular bar in the center, surrounded by tables along the outer walls. A dance floor stretched across one end, and beyond that, there was a stage for the band, though they weren't playing when we arrived. Jill and Frank were seated at a table on the far side of the room, and Jill waved to us as we entered. After the introductions, we ordered drinks and started chatting. It turned out that Frank also worked with computer networks, and before long, we were exchanging stories about the strange and unusual network problems we had encountered over the years. By the time the band started playing, we were so absorbed in our conversation and sitting so close to hear each other over the loud music that I hadn't noticed Tracy and Jill had left the table. It wasn't until I realized my beer was empty and looked up to see if anyone else needed a drink that I noticed the girls were gone. "This place is a popular hangout for people our age," Frank shouted over the music. "Jill and Tracy probably ran into some old friends." Frank and I got up to grab another round of beers at the bar, and that's when I saw Tracy talking to a guy on the other side. He seemed to be about my size and likely around my age. From their expressions, I could tell Tracy knew him. As I picked up my fresh beer, I glanced over at Tracy again. I'm not usually a jealous person, and I've always trusted Tracy. She's never given me a reason not to. From what I could see, their conversation looked innocent enough, so I wasn't worried. Frank and I headed back to the table and resumed our discussion about content delivery over a broadband network, which wasn't exactly a topic Tracy and Jill would have found interesting. About an hour later, Tracy and Jill returned to the table. By the look on Tracy's face, I knew it was time to stop talking shop and include them in the conversation. The rest of the evening went really well. I had taken a liking to Frank and Jill, and before we left, we invited them to visit us in Cincinnati to catch a Reds baseball game. On the drive back to Tracy's parents' house, I asked her about the guy I saw her talking to. "That was Barry Fox," she replied. "He was a friend of mine from high school. I'm sorry I was gone for so long, but I was really enjoying catching up with friends I haven't seen in years. We were sharing stories from our high school days, and they were filling me in on what's been going on with the others." "I'm glad you had fun. I was so caught up talking to Frank, I didn't even notice you leaving the table." "Aren't Jill and Frank great?" Tracy asked. "Yeah, I really liked them," I said. "Did you know they got married right out of high school? Jill got pregnant just before graduation, and they tied the knot that July. Everyone was gossiping, saying they'd end up divorced. No one thought they'd last, but it's been 18 years, and Jill told me they're still in love." "We've been together for 14 years, I said. "Do you still love me?" You know I do, Tracy said, leaning over to kiss me. The next morning, after thanking Tracy's parents for hosting us and babysitting the night before, we made the 4-hour drive back to Cincinnati. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was in my workshop sharpening the lawn mower blade. Tracy had just left to do the grocery shopping when the phone rang. Since I need to be reachable in case of any network issues over the weekend, I had a phone installed in my workshop in addition to my pager and cell phone. I picked up the phone on the third ring, and my son Matthew answered. "Hello?" "Hi, who is this?" the caller asked. "I'm Matthew." "Well, hello, Matthew. Is your mother home?" I was about to answer, but I decided to see how my 9-year-old would handle the situation. "No, sir," he said. "My mom just went to the store. Can I take a message?" I felt proud. He was handling the call just as I had taught him. "Yes, thank you," the caller replied. "I'm an old friend of your mother's. My name is Barry. Could you let her know I called?" "Yes, sir, I'll tell her you called," Matthew said. "Tell your mom I'll call her tonight at 8 o'clock, the caller added. "I will tell her." "Thanks, Matthew." The call left me surprised. Could this be the same Barry that Tracy had been talking to in Paducah? Why was he calling her? These questions made my stomach tighten a bit. I guessed I'd just have to wait until 8 o'clock when he called back to see what he wanted. I tried to push the thoughts aside and got back to what I was doing. I finished my outdoor chores about half an hour later and headed inside to take a shower. Afterward, I noticed Tracy wasn't home yet, and my curiosity about Barry Fox got the best of me. I did something I'd never done before. I went into Tracy's closet and found the box where she keeps personal items that hold special meaning to her. I didn't intend to invade her privacy. I was only looking for her high school yearbook. The first time I saw her yearbook was when we first moved in together during graduate school. It was in the same box of personal items. Back then, she told me that everything in the box predated our relationship and was important to her, so she'd prefer I didn't look through it. She assured me she wasn't keeping any secrets, just that those things were personal. I told her I didn't need to see them. As I went through the box, I found a bundle of letters I'd written to Tracy the summer after we met. There was our wedding invitation, along with every birthday, anniversary, Valentine's, and Mother's Day card I'd ever given her. By the time I reached the bottom of the box, I was feeling pretty good. The only thing unrelated to our relationship was Tracy's high school yearbook. That afternoon marked the first time in our 14 years together that I had looked inside the box. It was comforting to see that her yearbook was the only thing she kept from before we met. I didn't expect her to get rid of it. After all, I still have mine. But it was nice to see that everything else from her life before us was gone. I opened the book and turned to Tracy's senior photo. At 17, she was a very pretty girl, and in her face, I could already see the woman I later married. I slowly flipped through the pages, reading the notes her friends had written. They were typical yearbook messages like the ones I'd find in my own, saying things like, "I'll never forget the fun we had in Mr. Sayers' class," or, "We'll always be friends." Then I turned to the section with students whose last names started with F, and there I found Barry Fox. Next to his picture, Barry had written a long note. Though it was written 18 years ago, long before I knew Tracy, his words still made me uneasy. "My dearest Tracy," the note began, "I can't express how much you've meant to me over the past 6 months. I'm so in love with you that sometimes I feel like I might burst. Last week, when your parents were out of town, you made me feel like a real man for the first time. You're all I think about now, and I know I'll love you for the rest of my life. I can't wait for summer so we can be together all the time." It was signed, "Love always, Barry." I didn't need to reread it to understand the message. Barry and Tracy had been intimate in her parents' house. I knew Tracy wasn't a virgin when we started dating in college, but I had never given much thought to her past relationships. Reading Barry's note unsettled me, but I knew it shouldn't have, and I felt guilty for invading Tracy's privacy. I wished I hadn't read it. Just then, I heard Tracy's car pulling into the garage. I quickly tucked the yearbook back into the bottom of the box and put everything back in its place, making sure there was no trace of my snooping. Then, I went down to the garage to help her with the groceries. As we were putting away the groceries, Matthew entered the kitchen, and I realized he was about to tell Tracy about Barry's phone call. I quickly left the room to avoid being there when Matthew relayed Barry's message. It was a spontaneous decision. Initially, I had intended to stay and ask Tracy why Barry was calling, but at the last moment, I decided to wait until after she called him back to ask who had called and what they wanted. Tracy hadn't done anything suspicious, so I couldn't quite understand why I reacted the way I did. Unsure of my actions, I just chose to follow my instincts. When I returned to the kitchen, Tracy was still putting away the groceries, and she gave me a curious look. "Where did you suddenly disappear to?" she asked. "I had to go to the bathroom." "Matthew said someone named Barry called and will call back at 8, Tracy said. "Do you know anything about that?" "Number when did he call?" "Matthew said it was at 3. "Matthew's getting pretty good at taking messages, isn't he?" I said, trying to hide my discomfort. I wondered if Matthew had mentioned to his mother that Barry had identified himself as an old friend, or if she assumed it was someone else named Barry. It seemed unlikely that she wouldn't recognize it as her friend Barry calling. What were the chances it could be someone else? "What do you think he wants?" I asked. "Probably just someone collecting for charity or another credit card solicitation call," Tracy replied. Tracy appeared a bit uncomfortable as she spoke, and I was growing more anxious by the minute. While she was upfront with me about the phone message, she hadn't been entirely transparent. She didn't mention that it was her friend Barry from Paducah who had called. This meant I had to adjust my plan. Now I wanted to be sure to hear this call when it happened. "You're probably right," I said. "We've been getting a lot of credit card solicitations lately." The rest of the afternoon, Tracy was quiet, and she seemed a bit uneasy. At dinner, she barely looked at me, focusing all her attention on Matthew and Lisa. I started to feel as though I had done something wrong, but I knew that wasn't the case. At 7:30 p.m., I told Tracy that I had disassembled the lawnmower and needed to head to the workshop to reassemble it so I could mow the lawn on Sunday. The look of relief on Tracy's face was telling. She seemed glad I wouldn't be in the house when Barry called back at 8 o'clock. Little did she know, I planned to eavesdrop on the conversation. The phone finally rang at 8:10. I waited until the indicator light showed the line was active, then picked up and pressed the mute button. "Hello? Tracy?" "Yes." "Hi, it's Barry. How are you?" "Hi, Barry. I'm fine. This is a surprise," Tracy replied. "I hope a pleasant one," Barry added. Tracy didn't respond to that. "I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed seeing you after all these years," Barry continued. "It was great seeing you, too. When I got home and told Karen I saw you, she was upset that she missed you. She wanted me to make sure you call her the next time you're in Paducah. I wish Karen had been there. I would have loved to see her," Tracy said. I was starting to feel more at ease. The call seemed harmless enough. "I'm glad Karen wasn't there," Barry said. "I wouldn't have been able to dance with you like that if my wife had been there." "Dance like what?" Alarms began to go off in my head. "We shouldn't have been dancing like that. My husband was on the other side of the room and could have easily seen us," Tracy said. "You didn't seem to mind at the time." "I had too much to drink," Tracy responded. I wondered what on earth they had done on the dance floor. Tracy hadn't even mentioned that she had been dancing that night. After that, the call turned into a regular conversation between friends. I didn't know what to make of what I had overheard, but I decided that whatever happened that night, I wouldn't let it become an issue. I thought the call was winding down when suddenly I was hit with another surprise. "Tracy, I've had a change in my sales territory and will be coming to Cincinnati a few times a year now. I expect to be there in about 3 weeks, and I was wondering if I could take you out to dinner when I'm in town," Barry said. Tracy was silent for a moment before responding. I'm not sure Alan would be comfortable with me going out to dinner with one of my old boyfriends. One of your old boyfriends? I hope I was more than just one of your old boyfriends, Barry said. Besides, I wasn't planning on inviting your husband to join us. I can't go out to dinner with you, Tracy replied. Why not? Isn't it obvious? We're both married and I don't go out on dates with anyone other than my husband, Tracy said. I was relieved to hear her say that. It's just dinner between old friends. It's no big deal. When we were talking at the barn, I got the sense that you wanted more time to talk, Barry said. I did want to find out what happened to a few more of our old friends. Great. Then we'll have dinner and I'll fill you in on what's been happening with all your old friends in Paducah. Just dinner and conversation? Tracy asked. That question made me uneasy. It sounded like she was actually considering his offer. Yes, dinner and conversation. And then we'll see what else happens, Barry said. At that point, I wanted to yell into the phone, but I held back. I don't think that's a good idea, Tracy said. Come on, Tracy. I wouldn't be asking if your kiss hadn't shown me that you share my feelings. Barry. Don't say that. It was just a friendly kiss. Don't read anything more into it. The tension in my stomach kept building. Tracy appeared to be resisting Barry, but not strongly enough to convince either him or me that she wasn't interested in his offer. I'll give you time to think about it, and I'll call you again when I know exactly when I'll be in Cincinnati, Barry said. Number you can't call me. Why not? Alan will get suspicious of these calls, and I wouldn't know how to explain them to him. Well then, what's your work number? You can't call me at work either. I felt like Tracy was finally shutting Barry down. She was essentially telling him not to contact her again. Can I email you? Barry asked. Yes, that would be better, Tracy replied. I listened as she gave him her email address, and I felt sick to my stomach. All right then, look out for my email next week. Tracy, you know I still love you. Don't say that, Barry. That was the end of the conversation. I was so upset that I had to take a walk around the block to clear my head and breathe some fresh air. I started replaying everything I had just heard, trying to make sense of it. I had just listened to my wife's ex-lover invite her to have an affair. Tracy might want to believe it was just a dinner invitation, but she has to know it was more than that. Barry mentioned being in Cincinnati multiple times a year, which, to me, signaled that he was thinking about a long-term affair with my wife. That meant, if he didn't succeed in getting her into bed during his first visit, he would try again on the next. I tried to process everything, but I was too emotional to think clearly. Every time I thought about what could happen, I got angrier. I started talking to myself, saying things like, if she sleeps with him, I'll throw her out and beat the hell out of him. No rational thoughts, just pure emotion, mostly anger. By the time I returned home, I had managed to calm myself enough to feel in control, so I could go inside and face Tracy without losing my temper. After all, she hadn't done anything wrong yet. I decided to monitor her email and see if any real issues arose. Perhaps once Barry sent her an email, she'd have time to reflect on the situation and inform him that she would not be meeting with him. When I entered the house, Tracy looked at me curiously for a moment, and then asked, "Where were you?" "I went to your workshop, but you weren't there." I was feeling restless, and since it's a beautiful night, I took a walk around the block. "Are you still restless?" Tracy inquired. "I'm not sure. Why?" "Do you want to walk around the block again, and this time I'll join you?" Tracy suggested. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to be in a situation where I'd have to talk to Tracy. "I don't think we should leave the kids home alone." "You're right," she agreed. Without saying another word, I walked past Tracy and into the living room. I sat down, turned on the television, and remained silent for the next hour and a half. At 11 o'clock, I turned off the TV and went upstairs to bed. Tracy, who had been watching TV with me, followed me up without saying a word. I noted how we both seemed lost in our own thoughts. In the bedroom, I changed into boxer shorts and a t-shirt, my preferred summer sleepwear, and got into bed. When Tracy joined me, I rolled onto my side, facing away from her. I must have stayed like that for about 15 minutes trying to fall asleep, but I kept replaying parts of Tracy's conversation with Barry in my mind. I'm glad Karen wasn't there. I wouldn't have been able to dance with you like that if my wife had been present. I'll be coming to Cincinnati a few times a year now. I wasn't planning on inviting your husband to join us. When Tracy asked, "Just dinner and conversation?" Barry replied, "Dinner and conversation, and then we'll see what else happens." Listen, Tracy, I wouldn't be asking you to meet me if your kiss hadn't shown me that you shared my desire. All these thoughts were swirling in my head when I suddenly felt Tracy snuggling up to my back. She reached up and started playing with my hair. "Are you awake?" she asked. I almost didn't respond. "Yes." "Do you know how much I love you?" Tracy asked. That question made me so angry that I almost said, "As much as you love Barry," but I held back. "Number I really don't know," I replied. I could tell from the way Tracy's body tensed that she wasn't expecting that answer. "How could you not know?" she asked. "Isn't it obvious that I love you more than anything, except maybe Matthew and Lisa?" With that opening, I almost jumped on her. I wanted to say, "If you love me so much, why did you kiss Barry the other night? If you love me so much, why are you considering an affair with him when he comes to Cincinnati?" But I remained silent. Tracy was leaning on her elbow, looking down at me. She didn't say anything. She just bent down and started kissing my ear. As she nibbled on my ear, even my anger couldn't stop me from becoming aroused. I could feel her warm breath on my neck as she planted gentle kisses down the side of my face, and when she reached my cheek, I couldn't resist. I turned my head and let her kiss me on the mouth. I rolled over on my back and Tracy kissed me hard. Then she began to insist more and more. "I love you," she whispered. It all turned into intimacy, into real intimacy, and I couldn't help myself. It was very unusual. After that, none of us said a word. We just turned over and fell asleep. The next day at work, I easily cracked Tracy's email password. It was surprisingly simple. She used Matthew's initials and Lisa's birth date as her password, which was the third one I tried. I then set up MSN Instant Messenger on my work computer with Tracy's email address, so I'd get a notification whenever she received an email. Unfortunately, I couldn't check her email until I was certain she wasn't logged in. Fortunately, Tracy only accessed her email at work during the day since she didn't have a computer at home and never used mine. Tracy wasn't fond of computers and mainly used email just to communicate with friends around town, and even then, she didn't send or receive many messages. During the first week, Tracy received 7 emails, 4 of which were from Sue Baxter. They had previously worked together and continued to communicate via email, mostly sharing recipes. The other 3 emails were insignificant. It wasn't until Tuesday of the following week that Tracy received her first email from Barry. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was on the phone with Tracy, discussing what she wanted me to pick up from the store on my way home. Suddenly, I heard a ping, and a small notification popped up in the lower right corner of my screen with the message, "You have received mail from Foxman at x.com." It was hard to hide the sudden pain I felt in my chest from affecting my voice as I continued the conversation with Tracy. I waited a few minutes past 5 o'clock before calling Tracy's office phone to ensure she had already left for the day. Once I confirmed that she was gone, I accessed her email account and found Barry's message. I had been concerned that she might read and then delete it, but she hadn't. "Hi, Tracy. I wanted to let you know that I'll be in Cincinnati next Monday. I'll be staying at the downtown Marriott, and I'd really like you to join me for dinner. Love, Barry." I had to check Tracy's sent mail folder to find her reply. My heart raced as I opened the message, anxious about what it might contain. "Barry, I'd love to see you again, but only for dinner. Please don't expect anything more. Tracy." The note offered me no reassurance. While Tracy told Barry not to expect more than dinner, her acceptance of the invitation left the door open for more. She never explicitly said there would be nothing beyond dinner, only that he shouldn't expect anything more. I was certain Barry saw this as a positive response, whereas I found it troubling. That evening, things began to sour between Tracy and me. When I got home, I was upset with her but couldn't explain why, so I tried to act as if everything was fine. Tracy, on her part, seemed preoccupied and unwilling to share what was on her mind, leaving us both in a tense silence. Later that night, Tracy attempted to initiate intimacy, but I feigned sleep and didn't respond. The next morning at breakfast, Tracy was quiet, and I sensed she wanted to say something but didn't. I quickly finished my meal, grabbed my briefcase, and headed for the door, even though I usually wouldn't leave for work for another hour. I was eager to get out of the house. I was surprised when Tracy didn't ask why I was leaving so early. As I reached the door, Tracy began to say, "I love you," but I shut the door before she could finish. "I love you" was something Tracy said every morning as I left for work since we got married. But that day, I didn't want to hear it. That day, Tracy didn't call me at work as she usually did. This made me feel that her feelings towards me might have changed. By the end of the day, I saw 4 emails from Barry in Tracy's inbox. I waited until after 5 o'clock to check her emails. Barry's first message informed Tracy that he had made dinner reservations for 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday and would meet her at the Marriott bar at 7 p.m. Tracy's response indicated that she might not be able to attend, which gave me a bit of hope. Barry's next email read, "You have to come. We need to see if there's any chemistry between us. If not, at least we'll both know. Isn't it better to find out now rather than regret not trying? Please come." Tracy replied, "I will come, but you need to understand that it's just for dinner and nothing more. We're both married, and we shouldn't be looking for anything beyond that." Barry responded, "Great. I'm really looking forward to seeing you. It will make my business trip to Cincinnati much more worthwhile. I can't express how much this means to me." Tracy wrote back, "I'm looking forward to seeing you too, but remember what I said." Barry's final email read, "Don't worry. I won't pressure you. I would never make you do anything you're not comfortable with." That last email really annoyed me. Barry essentially implied that he intended to seduce her, but wouldn't force her. While he didn't say it outright, the underlying message was clear. I doubt Tracy would interpret it the same way. I sat at my desk for another hour, trying to figure out what Tracy was thinking. Was she just looking for excitement because she was bored, or was she genuinely interested in this guy? Was she planning to have an affair with him? What would I do if she did? I started to consider my options if Tracy ended up with this guy. I needed to calm down and think about the best possible outcome. That was easy. Tracy would change her mind and tell Barry that she wouldn't see him now or in the future. The absolute worst-case scenario would be if Tracy had an affair with Barry and then told me she was in love with him and wanted a divorce. I didn't think either of these extremes was likely. Whatever happened would probably be somewhere in between. I tried to imagine how I would handle each scenario. A one-time fling, a brief affair lasting a few months, or a long-term affair lasting more than a year. I was so emotionally distraught that I couldn't come to a rational decision about any of these possibilities. On the way home that evening, I decided to try being extra affectionate toward Tracy. Maybe I could guilt her into not meeting Barry at the Marriott on Tuesday. When I got home, I could hear Tracy in the kitchen preparing dinner. I went in with the intention of kissing her and telling her I loved her, but as soon as I entered the kitchen, she turned away from me and didn't even acknowledge my presence. I changed my approach, simply said hello, and walked out of the kitchen as she responded with a faint hello. At dinner, Tracy barely spoke to me and wouldn't look at me when she talked. However, she chatted and smiled at Matthew and Lisa, so whatever her issue was, it seemed to be directed at me. Once again that night, Tracy tried to initiate intimacy after we went to bed. She waited until the lights were off, but I simply rolled away from her and said I wasn't feeling well. I wasn't in the mood for intimacy, especially knowing she had planned a date with Barry. On Thursday morning, as I was leaving for work, Tracy didn't even bother to tell me she loved me. A few days earlier, I had not wanted to hear it, but now it hurt deeply not to hear it at all. That day, there were no more notes from Barry. I waited until 5 o'clock to see if Tracy had sent any notes to Barry, hoping she would cancel their date, but she didn't send him anything either. Thursday night was the same as before. Tracy couldn't meet my gaze when she spoke to me, and again tried to initiate intimacy once we were in bed. I refused her once more, and she wanted to know what was wrong. She asked why I wasn't interested in having intimacy with her. For over a week now, I've been getting the strong impression that you don't care about me as much as you used to, I said. You rarely talk to me, and when you do, you can't seem to look at me. But as soon as we get into bed, you expect me to make love to you. Well, I haven't been feeling any love lately, so I'm not giving any. When you're ready to talk and explain what's going on between us, maybe then we can start being intimate again. I waited for her response, but Tracy just rolled away and stayed silent. I don't think Tracy slept well that night, as I hardly slept at all and could sense her restlessness. On Friday morning, as I was heading out the door, Tracy stepped in front of me, looked me in the eye, and said, "I love you." I stared into her eyes for a moment. "I sure hope you do," I replied, and then I left. I spent the first 2 hours of Friday morning in my office, still grappling with how to deal with the potential outcomes of Tracy's date with Barry. My stomach was in knots, and my mind was spinning. Despite my deep contemplation, I wasn't making any headway. I began reflecting on the numerous stories about cheating spouses I had read online over the years. A recurring theme in many of these stories was that the husband would learn of his wife's infidelity or impending infidelity, but would choose to wait for concrete proof before taking any action, hoping to use that evidence for revenge. I didn't want to think about revenge. All I wanted was to restore my marriage to the way it was before Barry Fox came into the picture. Besides, how was I supposed to obtain proof that Tracy was having an affair with him? As I was mulling this over, I was abruptly pulled from my thoughts by the ringing of my telephone. It was a coworker with a question about a network issue he was facing. He informed me that we would likely encounter problems with a network segment next week due to our marketing team's plan to run streaming videos across the network. He was concerned that the high volume of traffic might cause the segment to crash and wanted advice on how to handle it if that happened. I advised him that we needed to be proactive to prevent the issue. I suggested, let's redistribute the network traffic to avoid concentrating all the streaming video on one segment. This way, we'll have sufficient bandwidth to manage the increased traffic. The solution was straightforward, and once I hung up the phone, a plan for dealing with my personal problem began to form. I shifted my perspective on the problem. Instead of focusing on what I would do if Tracy had an affair with that insignificant Barry, I started to think about how to prevent it from happening in the first place. My initial thought was to talk to Barry's wife. I considered having her reach out to Tracy, hoping it might make Tracy feel guilty about her actions. Alternatively, I could inform Karen about her husband's activities and hope she could put a stop to Barry's plans. Instead of using directory assistance to find Karen and Barry's number, I decided to call someone who knew them. "Hi, Frank. It's Alan Harris. How are you?" "Hey, Alan, I'm good. It's great to hear from you. What's up?" I didn't want to dive into the real reason for my call right away, so I started by discussing our invitation for Jill and Frank to join us for a ball game. "I was just reading the sports section," I said. "I saw the recap of last night's Reds game and thought of you and Jill. I decided to call and see if you're still interested in coming up for a game sometime." "Yes, we'd really like that. We probably won't be able to make it until August or September. I'll send you the home game schedule so you'll know which weekends the Reds are in town," I said. "That sounds great. Is it okay if we bring our son? I know he'd love to see a game." "Of course. The invitation was for the whole family," I replied. "While I have you on the line, could I ask you for a small favor?" "Sure. What do you need?" Do you know Barry and Karen Fox? I asked. Yeah, I know Barry. He works at the same company as I do, Frank replied. Do you happen to know their phone number? Tracy wants to call Karen. They were pretty good friends in high school, and Tracy was disappointed she didn't get to see her when we were in Paducah, I said. I can get you Barry's number, but he and Karen divorced about 5 years ago. Karen remarried and moved to St. Louis, Frank said. Do you know why they divorced? I asked. I'd like to inform Tracy. Barry was unfaithful. He had 2 or 3 girlfriends at the same time. How long did it take Karen to find out? It took her about 6 years. Barry had girlfriends in other cities. He'd tell Karen he was traveling for work, but he'd actually stay with his girlfriends in Bowling Green, Louisville, and Evansville. He used business trips as an excuse, Frank said. How did Karen find out? She ran into Barry's boss and learned that his job didn't require travel. He's not a salesman? I asked. The only thing Barry Fox sells is nonsense. He works in the warehouse as an assistant manager. He does a lot of overtime but doesn't get paid for it. Instead, he gets comp time, so if he works a weekend, he takes Monday and Tuesday off to travel. Did Barry ever remarry? No, but he still has a few girlfriends within a few hours' drive from Paducah, Frank said. Tracy will be quite interested in this information, I said. Frank and I chatted a bit more before ending the call. After the call, I had gathered enough information about Barry to make Tracy lose interest in him. I spent another hour contemplating how to present this information to her. I was confident that once Tracy learned the truth about Barry, that he had lied about his wife Karen, fabricated details about his business trip to Cincinnati, and had other girlfriends, she would quickly lose interest in him. I was ready to go home and reveal everything to Tracy when another thought crossed my mind. I was fairly certain this information would end her interest in Barry, but that wouldn't mean she chose me over him. It would mean she realized Barry wasn't the person she thought he was. In a calm and rational moment, I realized I needed to force Tracy to choose between our marriage and the idealized image of Barry she had, not the unfaithful jerk he truly was. It might seem irrational, but that's where my mind was at the time. When I got home that evening, I tried to be friendly and attentive to Tracy, subtly showing her my love. But when we went to bed, I rolled onto my side and went to sleep. Saturday and Sunday were incredibly difficult. Despite my attempts to act normally, Tracy still couldn't meet my gaze when she spoke to me. This deeply hurt me. Could she really dislike me so much that she couldn't even look at me? Monday turned out to be a much better day. Work was hectic, which made the hours pass quickly, and I felt a sense of relief knowing that I'd have some resolution by the end of the next day. When I got home on Monday night, I tried to act cheerful and asked Tracy about her day. I also attempted to unsettle her a bit. Lately it feels like we're drifting apart, I said. Maybe a little romance is what we need. How about a romantic dinner tomorrow night and then coming home to make love? What do you think? Tomorrow night isn't good for me, she replied. I'm going out for dinner and drinks with some of my girlfriends after work. Maybe we can plan something for later in the week. There it was. I had been wondering when and how she'd bring this up. The whole going out with the girls excuse felt like a cliché. I suddenly felt like a character in a story about a cheating wife. I think our marriage is more important than going out with your friends, don't you? Our marriage? Of course, but we made these plans last week, and it would be hard to change them now, she said. Not everyone needs to change their plans. Only you need to, I said. Alan, please, can't we just go out another time? Tracy begged. Well, at least I tried, I said. If you're going out, I'll stay late at the office to catch up on some work. Can you ask Sarah to babysit until you get home? I suppose I can call Sarah, but I don't know what time I'll be back. We might do something after dinner, she said. What exactly are you planning to do after dinner? Go pick up some men? I asked sarcastically. Tracy turned away from me without answering. She didn't take the bait, didn't get defensive, and didn't back down. I started to think our marriage might be in more trouble than I had realized. Later that evening, we both sat silently in front of the television, not speaking a word. At 11 o'clock, Tracy got up to go to bed. When I didn't follow her right away, she returned to the room. "Are you coming up?" she asked. "Not yet. I think I'll catch some of Letterman tonight." "Can't you come up now? I don't like sleeping without you," she said. "You might want to get used to it," I replied. "What does that mean?" "Just that you can't always expect me to be in bed next to you," I explained. "Why did you say that?" she asked. "I don't understand. Are you trying to tell me something?" "No, just giving you something to think about. Good night." Tracy stood in the doorway for another minute, staring at me. She seemed upset, but didn't say anything more. Finally, she turned and went to bed. When I went to bed about an hour later, Tracy was either asleep or doing a convincing job of pretending to be. I changed for bed, slid in next to Tracy, and tried to fall asleep. As I lay on my side, contemplating what might happen the following evening, Tracy stirred. I stayed still and began breathing deeply so she would think I was asleep if she was awake. "Alan," Tracy whispered. When I didn't respond, she said my name again, a little louder. "Alan." I remained unmoved. "I love you," she whispered before rolling away from me. I was baffled by what was happening. She accepted Barry's invitation for dinner and conversation. Then we'll see what happens. This date could jeopardize our marriage, and here she was, whispering her love for me. I was so furious at that moment that I wanted to shake her and shout, "What the hell are you thinking?" Instead, I kept up the pretense of being asleep. On Tuesday morning, I woke up at 5, so I got up, showered, and then went downstairs to make a pot of coffee. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, drinking my coffee, when I heard Tracy getting into the shower. I knew then that I didn't want to see her that morning, so I quickly finished my coffee and left the house. I stopped at a diner for breakfast before heading to work. I kept myself busy all day to avoid dwelling on what I had to do that night. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Tracy called me. When I heard her voice, I hoped she was calling to say she'd changed her mind and decided to have dinner with me. "Alan, I just wanted to let you know that I got Sarah to babysit tonight," she said. "I told her that you'd probably be the first one home, but I didn't know what time that would be. Sarah said that since it's a school night, she would need to be home by 10 o'clock. You'll be home by 10, won't you?" "Yes, I'll be home before 10, and you should be too." When Tracy didn't respond to that, I said, "I'm busy right now, I'll see you later," and hung up the phone before she could say anything more. At 5 o'clock, I was about to clear off my desk when my phone rang. I reached for it but didn't answer. I wasn't in the mood for conversation, and calls at that time of day usually meant trouble. The last thing I needed was another issue to handle. A few minutes later, my cell phone started ringing. I didn't even glance at it before turning it off, knowing that seeing the caller would make it harder to ignore. I stayed in my office until 5:30 that evening, and then walked the 4 blocks to the Marriott. I was surprised at how calm I felt as I entered the hotel. While walking through the lobby, I heard someone say, "Alan?" I turned to see who had spoken and if they were addressing me. It took a moment to realize the woman behind the hotel registration counter was waving at me. When I recognized her face, I couldn't help but smile as I approached the counter. "Jackie Washington, how are you?" I greeted her. Jackie had been a neighbor when Tracy and I were newlyweds, and she was a student at the University of Cincinnati. "I'm great, Alan, but it's Jackie Winters now. How have you been? It's been what, 8 years?" I smiled and replied, "I'd rather not count the years except to say it's been too long. I had no idea you worked here. I see you're the hotel manager now. How long have you been here?" "I've been with this hotel for 2 years. I started as a management trainee at the Marriott in Lexington 5 years ago. I was an assistant manager there until they promoted me and moved me here," Jackie explained. "I'm impressed. I work just 4 blocks away. Maybe we can grab lunch sometime," I suggested. "I'd like that, but I'm not sure my husband would appreciate it." "I understand completely," I said. "Why don't you give me your home number? I'll call you, and we can all go out to dinner sometime. I'd love to meet the man who won your heart." As soon as I spoke, I felt a pang in my chest, wondering if Tracy and I would still be together the next time I spoke to Jackie. While Jackie wrote her number on a slip of paper and handed it to me, she asked, "So how is Tracy?" "I think she's fine, but we'll see," I replied. "What's the issue?" "We're dealing with something that I'd rather not discuss right now. I'm here tonight to see if I can resolve it." "I hope everything works out for you." "I know I shouldn't ask this, but could you do me a favor?" I asked. "What do you need me to check?" "Could you find out if a Barry Fox is registered here?" "What do you plan to do if he is?" Jackie inquired. "Nothing. I just need to know if he has checked in." Jackie tapped a few keys on her computer and then looked up at me. "Mr. Fox checked in about an hour ago," she informed me. "Thanks, Jackie. I hope you'll eventually tell me what this is all about. It depends on how things turn out. If they go as I hope, I may never discuss this with anyone. If things don't go well, I might need someone to talk to," I said. As someone approached Jackie to speak with her, I said I had to leave and would call her to arrange a dinner. Then I headed toward the bar. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 5:15 p.m. I had an hour and 45 minutes to kill before Tracy was supposed to meet Barry. I scouted the bar for a spot where I could keep an eye out for Tracy without drawing attention to myself. I found the perfect spot on the far side of the bar, near a door leading to the restrooms. From there, I could sit at the bar and observe the room. If Tracy needed to use the ladies' room, I could easily move around the corner to stay out of sight until the moment was right. With that part of my plan settled, I stepped outside the hotel to pass the time and think about what I would say to Tracy later. I knew I couldn't memorize a speech, and a prepared speech probably wouldn't be suitable. I was focusing on ensuring I had all the key points clear in my mind so that the conversation could flow naturally, without me getting flustered if something unexpected came up. By 6 o'clock, I was feeling quite nervous and decided I needed a drink to calm myself. Before heading back to the bar, I called home on my cell phone. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hi, Sarah, it's Mr. Harris. I just wanted to check in and see if everything was okay." "Everything is fine here," she replied. "Did my wife happen to mention when she expected to be home tonight?" I asked. "No, but she knows I have to leave by 10. She looked great when she left, wearing an intimacy dress and her hair done nicely. I hope I look like her when I get older." That wasn't what I wanted to hear. "You will, Sarah. I'll be home by 10. So, if Tracy was dressed up as Sarah described, it seemed she was planning for this date to be more than just dinner and conversation. At that point, I was overwhelmed with emotions, depressed and angry. My depression made me want to go home and lie down, but my anger kept me from doing that. I paced outside the hotel until I could regain control of my emotions. At 6:15 p.m., I sat down at the Marriott bar, ordered a bourbon and water, and braced myself for the wait. I was halfway through my drink when a man took a seat next to me and ordered a draft beer. I didn't get a good look at him until he picked up his beer and walked slowly around the bar. I watched as he went to a table in a dark corner of the room, then returned to the bar for a brief chat with the bartender, ending with him giving a $10 tip. A few minutes later, the bartender placed a reserved sign on the table. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the man walked back toward me, I recognized him. Barry. It was clear that Barry was orchestrating the seduction of my wife. What happened next might have been almost funny if I hadn't been so upset. Barry came over, took a seat next to me, and ordered another beer. After his first sip, he turned to me and said, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I wanted to punch him but restrained myself. Yes, it is a beautiful day, which makes me wonder why I'm stuck in here instead of outside enjoying it. I couldn't believe it. Barry actually started making small talk. We discussed the Reds and their chances of winning a pennant. He mentioned that, being from Paducah, Kentucky, he was more of a St. Louis Cardinals fan, so we chatted about their prospects for a while. At 6:45, Barry said, "I need to head up to my room and get ready for my date. I've got a hot one meeting me here in 15 minutes. I usually let them wait a bit before I show up. It seems to make them happier when I do. Nice talking to you. Barry got up and left without introducing himself. At precisely 7 o'clock, Tracy walked into the bar. It was bad enough that she showed up at all, but she looked so stunning. Sarah had been right. Tracy wore a short black cocktail dress with black stockings that I suspected were thigh-highs rather than pantyhose. The dress revealed just enough cleavage to be intimacy without being over the top. The soft lighting in the room highlighted her long, dark hair and made her face look even more beautiful than usual. Seeing her dressed up for another man was incredibly painful. I had to take several deep breaths to compose myself. Tracy scanned the room for a few minutes, then went to the other side of the bar and spoke to the bartender. I saw him point, and she went over to the reserved table and sat down. It was clear that Tracy was nervous. Over the next 5 minutes, she pulled out her compact 3 times to check her appearance, and each time she looked around the bar, as if checking for familiar faces. Every time she glanced in my direction, I managed to duck out of sight. At 7:05, Barry finally entered the bar and joined Tracy at the table. Before sitting down, Barry leaned in to kiss Tracy. It seemed like he intended to kiss her on the mouth, but she turned her head, and he ended up kissing her cheek instead. I watched them as they chatted, and it was clear that Tracy was either very nervous or just uncomfortable. She kept fidgeting with her hands, placing them on the table, then under it, one on top and one beneath, and then repeating the process. She was still fidgeting when the waitress brought their drinks. Meanwhile, I was growing increasingly anxious, with my stomach churning and my palms sweating. I was trying to figure out the right moment to approach. I hadn't exactly made a conscious decision, but the situation seemed to be guiding me. When I saw Barry stand up, I assumed they were about to head to the restaurant, so I started to rise, eager to reach Tracy before they entered. But Tracy didn't get up. Barry walked towards the bar, then came around to my side. I began to wonder if he had recognized me or if Tracy had spotted me. Was this going to be the moment of confrontation between Barry and me? When Barry reached my side of the bar, he gave me a friendly nod and then headed out the door behind me. I turned to see where he was going and saw him enter the men's room. I quickly stood up, made my way around the bar, and approached where Tracy was sitting. She was focused on her compact mirror and didn't notice me coming. "Hi, Tracy." Tracy nearly jumped out of her seat when she looked up and saw me standing there. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I just thought I'd drop by and say hello to you and your friends. Since you seem to prioritize having dinner and drinks with them over dining with me tonight, I wanted to meet these friends of yours," I replied. Tracy's face went completely pale. I noticed her eyes dart towards the bar, looking for Barry's return from the restroom. She was starting to look quite ill. "Why didn't you call—" Tracy began, but I interrupted her. "Call you to let you know I was stopping by? Why should I?" "Please leave before my friends get here," she said. "Your presence is embarrassing me." I could hear the desperation in her voice. "What's the rush?" "Can't I just sit here and have a drink with you?" I asked. I could see her trying to come up with something to get me to leave before Barry returned. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and I realized Barry must be coming back soon. "Hey man, she's with me," Barry's voice came from behind. "Is he bothering you, Tracy?" When I turned around, Barry greeted me with a smile. "Oh, it's you. Sorry, but she's already taken. I mentioned I had a hot date tonight." "That you did, Barry." "How did you know my name?" he asked. "Let me introduce myself," I said. "I'm Alan Harris, Mr. Harris to her Mrs. Harris." Barry took a couple of steps back. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't know," he said. "Didn't know what? That she was married or that I'm the one supposed to be at home with our kids while you're trying to seduce my wife?" I replied. I glanced at Tracy, who looked almost paralyzed, then back at Barry. "Why don't we sit down and have a chat?" I said, my voice calm to the point of surprising myself. "Listen, I don't want any trouble. I'll just leave and let you two work this out," Barry said. "Barry, stop being so anxious. There won't be any trouble tonight, so just sit down." Barry sat down, and I pulled a chair from a nearby table and took a seat. Tracy finally tried to speak. "Alan, this isn't what you think," she said. I put a finger to my lips to silence her. "Tracy, I'm not sure what to think, but I do know it's inappropriate for a married woman to be on a date with a former lover." Tracy tried to speak again, but I held up my finger once more. "I know you want to say it was just dinner between old friends. I can't accept that. If that were the case, I would have been invited, and you wouldn't have lied about going out with your girlfriends. If this was truly just a dinner and conversation, you wouldn't have dressed like this. You look beautiful, which makes it even more upsetting to think you dressed up for another man." Barry tried to defend Tracy. "That's all it was. I was just in town for the night and didn't want to eat alone. There was nothing more to it," he said. I laughed at him. "There's no way you traveled all the way from Paducah to Cincinnati and spent $200 on a hotel room just to have dinner with my wife," I said. "I had to be here for business anyway, so I called Tracy." I interrupted him before he could finish that lie. "Barry, we both know that's not true. Assistant warehouse managers don't go on business trips, do they?" Barry leaned back in his seat and stayed silent. Tracy hadn't looked at Barry since he joined us. She was either looking at me or staring at her hands. In a very calm and low voice, I started saying what I had come there to tell Tracy. "Tracy, when I first found out about this date, I was sure you would never go through with it. I believed you loved me and would never hurt me like this. But over the past 2 weeks, I've started to doubt your feelings for me. You barely speak to me anymore, and when you do, you can't look me in the eye. I didn't know if it was because you couldn't stand to look at me, or if you were afraid I'd see on your face that you no longer care." Tracy grabbed my arm and tried to speak, but I stopped her. "Let me finish what I came here to say. What I couldn't understand was how you could ignore me all day, yet when night fell, you were eager to be intimate with me. I started to wonder if you actually wanted to be with me, or if I was just part of some intimacy fantasy you were playing out in your head. Were you thinking of this loser?" I directed the last comment at Barry. He scowled in response but remained seated. Tracy's eyes were brimming with tears, though she wasn't crying yet. She tightened her hold on my arm. "Please, Alan," was all she managed to say. "I suppose it was naive of me to think you wouldn't jeopardize 13 years of marriage for a brief affair," I said. "What disappoints me most is that you didn't even care enough about our children to shield them from the possible fallout of your actions." That was it. Tracy broke down in tears, and I felt her nails digging into my arm. I pulled my arm away and stood up. "The next move is yours, Tracy. It's 7:30 now, and I'm going home. I'll give you until 8:30 to return home. An hour should be sufficient for you to say goodbye to Barry and get back by 8:30, but it won't allow for much else. If you're not home by then, I'll consider our marriage to be over." For a moment, I considered revealing what I had discovered about Barry, but I realized Tracy needed to make her decision based on her feelings for me, not on how she felt about Barry once she learned what kind of person he was. If she chose him in the end, she would have to face the consequences. "I don't want to waste any more of your time," I said. "So I'll leave now. Maybe I'll see you at home, Tracy." As I turned to go, amidst my hurt and anger, I felt a sense of pride. I hadn't attacked Barry, raised my voice, or insulted Tracy. I hadn't said anything excessively hurtful or unforgivable. I had clearly expressed my feelings, and now the decision was up to Tracy. I had just reached the exit from the bar into the hotel lobby when I heard Tracy cry out, "Alan, please don't leave now." I didn't stop. As I walked back to the garage at my office building to retrieve my car, I reflected on everything I had said to Tracy and felt that I had conveyed almost everything I intended. I only regretted not having found a way to make Barry's life as miserable as he had made mine. I resolved that if the opportunity ever arose, I would repay him for his actions. When you get involved with married women, you should be ready to face the consequences. I drove home slowly with my windows down, trying to stay calm. I turned on the radio and sang along with the songs to distract myself from thinking about Tracy and our marriage. I estimated the chances of Tracy coming home by 8:30 to be about 50-50, and I thought that might even be optimistic. I arrived home 10 minutes after 8. Sarah was surprised to see me so early, but when she saw my expression, she didn't ask any questions. I thanked her as I paid her, and she then went home. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, took it into the living room, and sat down to wait. I turned on the TV, but the lame comedy shows at that hour only added to my misery, so I turned it off. I sat there, trying not to think about anything, but it was futile. The closer it got to 8:30, the more agitated I became. My palms were sweating again, and my stomach was churning, but that didn't stop me from having a second beer. As I stared at the beer bottle between my knees, I heard the grandfather clock in the dining room chime the half hour. I got up slowly, walked to the kitchen, poured out the remaining beer into the sink, and left the empty bottle on the counter. I then walked to the front of the house, looked out the window, and saw no sign of Tracy. Shit, I muttered to myself, then turned off all the lights and went upstairs. I peeked in on Matthew and Lisa before heading to my room to change for bed. As I climbed into bed, I contemplated how different my life was going to be from that point on. I turned off the lamp on my bedside table and tried to convince myself that I would actually be able to sleep. I had only been in bed for 5 minutes when I heard the front door open. I glanced at the clock, even though I already knew what time it was. She was 15 minutes late. What did that mean? Was it because she found it so difficult to leave him and come home? Did she have to reassure Barry that they would meet another time? Or did she, like me, take her time driving back? I debated whether to go downstairs and confront her or to stay in bed and pretend to be asleep. It was only 8:45, and I knew she wouldn't believe I'd be in bed this early. After a few more minutes, it became clear she wasn't coming upstairs soon, so I got up and went to find her. I needed to get some resolution to this situation that night. Tracy was sitting alone in the dark living room. I turned on a light as I passed through to the kitchen, grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, and returned to the living room. I handed one of the beers to Tracy. When she looked up, her eyes were red and her nose was running. I didn't say anything. I went to the bathroom, grabbed a box of tissues, and placed them on the coffee table in front of her. "Thanks," Tracy said softly. "I guess it's your turn to talk and mine to listen," I said, as calmly as I could manage. Tracy gazed at me with sad eyes. "Alan, I need you to do something before I try to explain," she said. "Why should I do anything for you?" I asked. "It's not a favor," she replied. "I just need you to do this so you'll believe what I have to say." I didn't like the sound of that. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I tried to call you at your office at 5 o'clock today, but you didn't answer. When I called your cell, you didn't pick up either," she said. "Are you saying that what happened tonight was because I didn't answer my phone?" I asked, incredulous. "In a way, yes," she said. "But for you to understand, you need to listen to the voicemail I left you at 5 o'clock. Please listen to that message, and then I'll tell you everything you want to know." I looked into Tracy's eyes, searching for some clue about where this was headed. All I saw was her pleading look, urging me to do as she asked. As I stood up to answer the phone, I remembered that I had missed a call at 5 o'clock, and shortly afterward my cell phone rang, which I turned off without checking who it was. So, she was probably telling the truth about the phone calls. But how could my not answering her call excuse her plans with Barry? I glanced back at Tracy before leaving the room. She was staring at her hands, seemingly oblivious to everything around her. Her legs were spread enough that I could see the tops of her thigh-high stockings beneath her intimacy little black dress. There was no way her phone message could justify the way she had dressed for her date with Barry. I picked up the kitchen phone, dialed my voicemail, and entered my password. There were 3 messages waiting for me. 2 were work-related and arrived after Tracy's call, which had come in at 5 o'clock. Here is the message Tracy left for me. "Alan, I thought you'd still be at the office since you said you were working late. Call me when you get this. I'll try to reach you on your cell after I leave this message. I've been reflecting on what you've been saying lately and realized that I've been acting strangely toward you. I didn't see how foolish I was until yesterday when you questioned me about going out with friends tonight. I thought about it and realized you were right. Our marriage is more important than a night out with my friends. I'm sorry I didn't think of this sooner. I told you that my friends and I had planned this night out last week, and I couldn't change it. But maybe we can compromise. I thought I could go out for drinks with the girls and then meet you at 8 at Anthony's for dinner. This way, we can have our romantic dinner and still be home by 10 for Sarah. Then I can show you how much I love you. I'll keep trying to call you, but if I don't hear from you before 8, I'll just go home. I'm going home now to change into something intimacy so you won't be able to resist me. The only thing that came to mind was, holy shit. She dressed like that for me, not for him. We still had some issues to work through, but it seemed she chose me over Barry on her own. Things were starting to look up. I went back into the living room, took a seat on the sofa next to Tracy, and gently took her hands in mine, gazing into her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Alan," she said. "I don't know what I was thinking when I agreed to meet Barry for dinner. I knew you would disapprove of me seeing him, and that should have been enough for me to say no. Please believe me when I say I never intended to sleep with him. I thought we would just have dinner, reminisce about old times, maybe dance a bit, and then I'd come home. I thought I had everything under control. I really hated lying to you, which is why I couldn't look at you when we talked. I was sure you'd see right through me." "Did you really think Barry was only interested in talking?" "No, and that's probably why I wanted to see him. I didn't want to sleep with him, but I guess I liked the idea that he was interested in me." I had several more questions for Tracy, but at that moment, what I really wanted was to make love to her and reassure her that everything would be okay. I cupped her face in my hands, pulled her close, and kissed her. Tracy responded by opening her mouth to accept my tongue. I stood up, took her hand, and said, "Let's go to bed and make the most of our romantic evening." As I followed Tracy up the stairs, I flirted with her in every possible way, which lifted our spirits. She tried to push my hand away, laughing, and continued up the stairs. I followed her into the bedroom, where she turned around, grabbed me, and started kissing me. After that, we became close, and it was very unusual. A few minutes later, I fell into the soundest sleep I've had in weeks. In the morning, Tracy and I had breakfast together. When I was leaving, she stopped me at the door and kissed me. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." I felt good when I drove my car out of the driveway and headed to work, but my mood suddenly soured for no apparent reason. Something was bothering me, although I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. By the time I got to my office, some pieces of the puzzle had begun to piece together, and my mood had soured even more. Tracy had decided to be with me the night before, but in hindsight, I still couldn't be sure it was out of love. Had she merely realized I might be aware of what was happening and made arrangements to meet me for dinner at 8 o'clock to make me think she had chosen not to have an affair with Barry, only to later meet Barry and set up plans for his next visit? I tried to convince myself that wasn't the case, but I recalled all the subtle hints I had given Tracy, indicating I knew what was going on. After all, I still didn't understand why she had agreed to meet him in the first place. Additionally, there were the things Barry mentioned during their phone call about how they danced and shared a kiss. I was no longer certain that I had saved my marriage. It might only be a matter of delaying the inevitable. I was sitting at my desk trying to get some work done when a notification popped up in the lower right corner, indicating a message from Foxman at xxxxx.com. It was 10:30 a.m., so I waited until after lunch to open Tracy's email. I no longer had the patience to wait until after 5 o'clock to see what the note contained and if Tracy had replied. Barry's message read, "T. Sorry about the mess the other night. How did he know you were going to meet me in the hotel bar? Anyway, I'll be back in Cincinnati in a month. Can we try to get together then? I had to wait 10 minutes before I could bring myself to check Tracy's sent items to see if she had responded, and if so, what she had said. Once my heart rate dropped below 100, I opened Tracy's sent folder and found her reply. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, hoping that a bit more waiting might bring me good news in her response to Barry. Whether my hesitation made a difference, I'm not sure, but the news was positive. Tracy's reply read, "Barry, agreeing to meet you was a big mistake, and I don't plan to make that mistake again. I think I was able to save my marriage, and I don't want to put it at risk. Do not contact me again. Tracy." I closed Tracy's email and leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of relief. Although my earlier concerns remained unresolved, I had told Tracy I didn't want to discuss it further, so I decided not to bring up the subject again. I would have to accept that some questions might never be answered. Life had started to return to normal. Tracy was as loving as ever, and our intimacy life was satisfying, but lingering doubts from unanswered questions still troubled me. I came close several times to discussing Barry and why Tracy had agreed to meet him, but everything else was going so well that I feared bringing it up might ruin things. Despite not seeing any signs of trouble in our marriage, I continued to monitor Tracy's email and phone calls, especially if I wasn't sure who she was talking to. On a few occasions when Tracy said she had to work late, I drove by her office to confirm her car was there, and later called to ensure she was present. By mid-September, I began to realize that my behavior was unreasonable. After spending many hours replaying everything that had happened, one thing became clear. Tracy had never stopped loving me. Although I still didn't understand why she had agreed to meet Barry, I knew it was time to move past it and trust her. Once I made that decision, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, though that relief was short-lived. One Saturday afternoon, after mowing the lawn, I came inside and heard Tracy on the phone. I didn't catch much of the conversation, but I did hear her say, "He just came in, I have to go," before hanging up. "Who was on the phone?" I asked. "My mother." "What did she want?" "She just wanted to chat," Tracy replied. There was something in her voice that suggested she wasn't being entirely truthful, but I had no solid reason to press her. On Monday, when I checked her email, there were no new messages, and all her old emails had been deleted. I checked her email several times that week, but never found any new messages. I started to suspect that Tracy might have opened a new email account, but I had no way of confirming it. The following week, Tracy began to behave as she had before her date with Barry. She was distant, rarely spoke to me, and avoided making eye contact. Yet, at night, she would initiate intimacy. Was she considering seeing Barry again, or was it someone new? Perhaps the thrill from her near affair with Barry had sparked a desire for infidelity, and now she had found another man. I was experiencing the same gut-wrenching pain and losing sleep once more. The next weekend, Jill, Frank, and their son Frank Jr. came to visit and attend a Reds game with us. They stayed for the weekend, and we had a wonderful time, hoping it would improve things between Tracy and me. That Saturday night, we were in the backyard, having beers and grilling steaks. Tracy, Jill, and Frank were reminiscing about old friends when Frank brought up Barry Fox. He asked Tracy if she had ever contacted Barry's wife, Karen. When Tracy replied that she hadn't, Frank detailed how Karen had divorced Barry due to his multiple affairs, how he had girlfriends in various cities, and how Barry would fabricate business trips to visit them. I was shocked. Frank had exposed the truth about Barry to Tracy, and I had never mentioned him. I hoped that hearing Frank's story would make Tracy reconsider her thoughts about Barry. She needed to know what kind of person he truly was. Tracy's reaction was inscrutable. Her expression didn't change, and she didn't ask any questions. I couldn't gauge her feelings or whether she was upset or indifferent. Despite not knowing her thoughts on the matter, I was relieved that Frank had brought it up. The situation reached a breaking point in October. My birthday, on October 11th, fell on the second Friday of the month. In previous years, Tracy would spend weeks probing for hints about what I wanted for my birthday. This year, she didn't ask even once. By Thursday, she had stopped speaking to me altogether. It felt as if our marriage was already over, but no one had bothered to inform me. On Friday morning, I got up early and left for work before Tracy was awake. I tried to stay busy, but my heart was broken. I couldn't understand how things had gone so well for us and then deteriorated so quickly. By 11 o'clock that morning, I had accomplished nothing and was considering taking the rest of the day off as a sick day. Just as I was deciding whether to go home, my boss, Jack Ferris, called. He informed me that our office in Lexington was experiencing network issues and needed me to drive down there to resolve the problem. "Can't Tom handle it?" I asked. Tom Mosley, the network manager at the Lexington office, was on vacation that day. "Tom is out today," Jack replied. It was an 85-mile drive to the Lexington office, and I arrived around 1:30 p.m. Upon arrival, I was informed that the network had just been restored. I was frustrated to have driven all the way to Lexington for nothing, as Tom had managed to fix the issue over the phone from home. Brian Cadwell, the office manager, apologized for the inconvenience and invited me to grab a coffee at a nearby Starbucks before heading back to Cincinnati. I returned to my office at 4:15 p.m., only to find 2 report requests on my desk with a note from Jack asking me to compile the data and complete the reports before going home. I was annoyed that Jack had assigned me this work late on a Friday afternoon after sending me to Lexington. It would take me 2 hours to gather the data and finish the reports. Forget it, I said to myself. I had nowhere else to go, and the thought of rushing home to a wife who didn't even want to talk to me wasn't very appealing. So, having something to occupy my time felt like a bit of a relief. I was just about to begin working on the reports when I noticed the message light blinking on my phone. I checked my voicemail and found a single message from Tracy, left at 1:30 that afternoon. "Alan, I'm going out with some girls from work tonight. I might be late, so don't wait up for me. I asked Sarah to come over until you get home, but try not to be too late." Going out with the girls? Who does she think she's kidding? Then it hit me. Maybe she wasn't trying to deceive me. Perhaps she was deliberately making it clear that she had something else going on and didn't care if I knew about it. I grabbed my phone and called Tracy's office, only to be told she had already left for the day. I then called home and Sarah answered, saying Tracy had already left there too. "Did she say where she was going?" I asked. "No." "What was she wearing?" "She had on jeans and a sweater," Sarah replied. That didn't give me much to go on. I tried calling Tracy's cell phone, but she didn't answer. I left a message asking her to call me back, though I didn't hold out much hope. I couldn't help but wonder if there was any significance to Tracy doing this on my birthday. There was nothing more I could do to stop her. I had no idea where she had gone, and with her phone turned off, I was left helpless. It struck me that perhaps I should have stayed out of Tracy's date with Barry. If I had, the end of our marriage might have been settled by now, and instead of enduring this pain, I could have started rebuilding my life. I tried to push all of that out of my mind and began compiling the data for the reports. At 6:15, as I was finishing the second report, my phone rang. "Alan? Yes? It's Jackie Winters." "Hi, Jackie. What's going on?" I asked. "Alan, I'm not sure what's happening, and this might not be my business, but I thought I should try to reach you." Jackie's tone made me uneasy. "Jackie, what's the matter?" I asked. I was about to leave at 5:30 and was in my office when I saw Tracy check into the hotel. "Did you know she was staying here tonight?" Jackie inquired. "No, I didn't." "Is the room under her name?" I asked. "Yes, and she left a note at the front desk." "Can you tell me who the note was for and what it said?" I asked. "It seems you're always asking me for information I shouldn't be giving out. Why don't you just come over? We can talk when you get here." "Thanks, Jackie. I'll be there in a few minutes," I said. I quickly wrapped up the second report, placed both reports in the internal mail, and sent them to Jack. Then I walked to the Marriott. At the registration desk, I asked for Jackie Winters, and she emerged from the office a couple of minutes later. Jackie led me to a sofa in the lobby where we sat down. "I'm sorry I had to be the one to tell you this," she said. "You need to promise me you won't do anything reckless." "I just need to know who she left the note for, and then I need to talk to her," I replied. The note was addressed to someone named John, no last name. Inside the envelope was a key card to her room and a note saying, "I'm in room 706. Come on up and let yourself in." John? I have no idea who that could be. Has anyone picked up the note yet? I asked. "No, and no one can," Jackie said. "I have the note in my pocket. I'm going to give you the key card to room 706 so you can talk to Tracy before this John person arrives. I've instructed the desk staff to call the room if he shows up while you're with Tracy, but you have to promise not to do anything foolish. Remember, I'm taking a risk giving you this key, and if there's trouble, I could lose my job." "Jackie, I promise I won't do anything to get you in trouble. I just need to talk to Tracy and see if I can prevent whatever she's planning," I assured her. "Thanks, Jackie. I really appreciate your help and won't forget it." I took the key card from Jackie's hand and made my way to the elevators. The ride up to the 7th floor felt like the longest, or perhaps the shortest long elevator ride I'd ever experienced. Part of me was eager to reach Tracy's room and get this confrontation over with, while the other part dreaded it, fearing that this meeting could spell the end of our marriage. When I reached the door at room 706, I paused and listened for a moment. I could hear the television, but nothing else. Taking a deep breath, I reached out to insert the key card into the reader. My hand trembled so badly that I had to use both hands to guide the card into place. The reader's light turned red, so I quickly pulled the card out and double-checked the room number. Confirming that I was at the right room, I realized that I had inserted the card upside down. I turned it around and tried again. This time, the light turned green. I removed the card and quietly opened the door, stepping inside. Just inside the door to my left was a closet with mirrored sliding doors. One door was slightly ajar, revealing a suitcase on the floor. Seeing the suitcase made my heart sink. It meant Tracy wasn't planning to go home that night. I wondered if she ever planned to come home again. To my right was the closed bathroom door. A glance at the reflection in the mirrored doors showed that no one was in the bedroom. I could hear water running in the bathroom, indicating where Tracy was. I let the room door close, hoping the sound would alert Tracy, and it did. "Oh, good, you're here," she called out. "I just got out of the shower. There's some beer in the ice bucket on the table. Help yourself, I'll be out in a few minutes." My first impulse was to storm into the bathroom and confront Tracy, demanding to know why she was doing this to me, to us. But I knew reacting with violence wouldn't help. Besides, I was curious about how Tracy would be dressed when she emerged. If she came out knack-d or in a intimacy negligee, it might mean this wasn't her first time with this John person. But if she was fully clothed, it might be their first encounter. I walked into the bedroom, grabbed a beer from the ice bucket, and sat down in a chair next to the table, staring blankly at the television without really paying attention to what was on. I had finished about half of my beer when I heard the bathroom door open. Tracy stepped out and walked toward the closet without even glancing in my direction. She was wearing nothing but a black bra and matching panties, and as she bent over to get something from her suitcase, I got a perfect view of her beautiful backside. The sheer fabric revealed the smooth curves separated by the shadowy line hiding her secrets. Unfortunately, I wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. Still bent over, rummaging through her suitcase, Tracy started talking. "Our dinner reservation is at 7:30, so we've got some time to fool around if you want," she said. I stood up and began walking toward her. I wanted to be close enough when she realized it was me in the room, not her lover, so I could see the surprise and then the fear in her eyes. I had no intention of hurting her, but she wouldn't know that. When I was about 4 feet away, I called her name. Tracy. She straightened up and spun around quickly to face me. As she turned, I noticed she was holding something, but once she saw me, she hid it behind her back. I took another step closer, locking eyes with her. I waited for the fear I was sure she'd be feeling to show on her face, but instead of fear, Tracy smiled at me. I wasn't ready for that, and the words I wanted to say got stuck as I tried to process what it could mean. Did Tracy not care that I had caught her? She must have known I'd never hit her, and now she was going to humiliate me by flaunting the fact that she was waiting for another man in a hotel room. She didn't even seem curious about how I found out she'd be here. Alan. I had expected, no, hoped, that her initial reaction would shift after a few seconds, but it didn't. She just kept smiling at me. I couldn't believe how calmly she was handling this. She held my gaze, and I still couldn't find the words to push forward with my accusations. I struggled to think of something to regain control of the situation, but before I could, Tracy surprised me again. She brought her hand from behind her back and handed me a large blue envelope with my name printed in bold letters. I stared at her in stunned silence, unable to say a thing. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Tracy said softly, then gave me a tender kiss on the lips. Suddenly, my legs felt weak, and I had to backpedal to sit down on the bed. "What's this?" I finally stammered. "What's going on?" "There are actually two things happening here," Tracy said. "First, you're being punished for spying on me, listening to my phone calls, reading my emails, and generally not trusting me. Second, and more importantly, this is your birthday surprise, and I bet you're really surprised." "I don't know what to say." "Wait a second. This is your idea of revenge? I spied on you a little, and you decide to get back at me by meeting some guy named John on my birthday?" I asked. "Who's John?" Tracy asked. "You left a note for a guy named John at the reception desk with this room number and a key. So don't play innocent. Who the hell is John?" I said. "I don't know who John is," she replied. "Are you telling me you didn't arrange to meet some guy here tonight?" I asked. "No, I'm not trying to tell you that." "You're right, I did arrange to meet a man here tonight. I arranged to meet the man I love, the most important man in my life," she said. I was starting to feel lightheaded. Had she slipped something into my beer? I really didn't think she was capable of that. The real issue was that she had gained control of the situation, and I was struggling to take it back without any success. "So, when is he coming?" "He's already here, silly." "Who's already here?" "You are. The man I love, the one who means the most to me, is you. Haven't you realized that yet?" she said. I was beginning to understand what she was saying, but I was still confused. "Then who is John?" I asked again. "There is no John. John was just a name that Jackie wrote on an envelope for me," Tracy said. "Jackie was in on this?" "I needed someone to get you down here without giving away what I was planning," she explained. "I didn't know what name Jackie would use on the envelope. I left it up to her because the name didn't matter as long as it wasn't Barry. I thought about using Barry's name, but that would have been too cruel and might have made you a little too frantic." Now the whole thing was starting to make sense. I had been completely set up. "How many other people were involved in this?" "Your boss," Tracy began. "I needed him to keep you busy so you wouldn't get my voicemail until it was too late to act. Sarah, because I had to tell her what to say if you called or came home. Your parents, because they had to pick up the kids for the weekend. There were a few others with small roles, like the office manager in Lexington, who told you the network was back online right before you arrived and got you to stay a bit longer before heading back to Cincinnati." "You did all this to punish me for spying on you a little?" I asked. "You've driven me insane for the last 3 weeks, only to tell me this was all some birthday surprise? And you dragged my family and friends into it too. My behavior may have been wrong, but what you did, Tracy, this was way over the line. It was downright cruel. Jackie is the only one who knows the full story. Everyone else thought they were just helping me plan a birthday surprise for you. Things weren't meant to turn out like this. Originally, your birthday and this revenge, if that's what you want to call it, We're supposed to be completely separate, she said. When I found out you were listening in on my phone calls and reading my emails, I felt hurt and angry that you didn't trust me. Then you started checking on me at work whenever I had to stay late. I know I planted the seeds of doubt in your mind, but if you had just sat down with me to talk about what happened with Barry, why it happened, and asked me any questions that were bothering you, I could have put your mind at ease. Instead, you refused to talk and let those doubts fester, which led you to distrust me even more. So, I started acting like I did before the situation with Barry, hoping that you would notice and confront me about it, and then we'd finally have the conversation we should have had 3 months ago. I had been planning this weekend alone for your birthday for over a month, she continued, but when, instead of questioning my suspicious behavior, you chose to intensify your spying, I escalated my plan to teach you a lesson. I hadn't meant for it to go this far until Jill and Frank visited. My mind was spinning between the relief of knowing Tracy wasn't planning to have an affair and the anger over the cruel trick she'd played on me. What did their visit have to do with any of this? I asked. It was clear that you thought my behavior meant I was planning to meet up with Barry, she replied. What made you think that? I asked. It was obvious you got Frank to bring up all that stuff about Barry. You had him tell that story about Barry's divorce and his many girlfriends. You used Frank to trash Barry's reputation because you were scared I was planning to meet up with him. Even after I told you I had no intention of having an affair with Barry, you still didn't believe me. I could have almost forgiven you for that, but when you dragged Frank into our problems and used him to spread those stories about Barry, that was too much. You didn't trust me enough to believe I wouldn't let myself be seduced by Barry, so you tried to make him seem like a total sleazebag just to ensure I'd lose interest in him. And you involved my friends to do it. I raised my hand to stop her. I was finally ready to defend myself. Hold on just a minute, I said. First off, whether or not Barry's a sleazebag, think about this. What do you call a man who tries to get a married woman to go to his hotel room, knowing he might destroy her marriage? I'd call him a sleazebag, wouldn't you? That makes me wonder what you were thinking. You believed he was married, and yet you still agreed to meet him that night. I noticed Tracy's expression shift as she processed what I had said. Secondly, and more importantly, I continued, I never asked Frank to tell you anything about Barry. He doesn't even know what happened that night. Then why did he mention it? She asked. Back in June, when I was trying to prevent you from meeting Barry while he was in town, I explained, I called Frank to see if he had Barry's phone number. I told him you wanted to reach out to his wife Karen because you missed her when we were in Paducah. My plan was to call Karen and let her know Barry was trying to meet you at a hotel, hoping she could stop him. That's when Frank told me Karen had divorced him and why. He also shared how Barry had girlfriends in different cities, pretending to be on business trips so he could visit them. Frank only brought it up because I told him you were trying to contact Karen. Tracy's eyes widened. Why didn't you tell me all this before I met with Barry that night? She asked. I wanted you to make your decision based on how you felt about me, I said. I didn't want to win just because you found out last minute that Barry was a jerk. Tracy came over, sat next to me on the bed, and gently ran her fingers through my hair. Let's talk about this now, she said. I know you've been holding back some questions, so ask them. I guess it goes back to the night Barry called you, and I overheard the conversation. He made a remark about how you two were dancing, like it had some kind of meaning, I said. It probably did to him, Tracy replied. I was feeling pretty good from the drinks and having fun reminiscing with Barry. When he asked me to dance, I didn't think much of it. But when the band played a slow song, he pulled me close. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but then he put his hand on my butt. I made him move it right away, but I didn't push him away, and we kept dancing. Why didn't you tell him on the phone that night that you didn't appreciate what he did? I asked. Because I didn't think it was a big deal. Why make him feel bad? I did tell him it was inappropriate and that it only happened because I'd been drinking, she said. What about the kiss? He made it seem like it was pretty intense, I said. Tracy suddenly leaned in and kissed me on the lips. just a brief kiss, no tongue. That's exactly how I kissed him. I told Barry I needed to get back to you and gave him a quick goodbye kiss. He just tried to make it seem more significant than it was, hoping I would believe it too. If you understood that back then, you must have known what he was after when he asked to meet you in Cincinnati. You said it would only be dinner and conversation, and even added that he shouldn't expect anything more. But telling him not to expect more isn't the same as saying there would be nothing more. You left him thinking he still had a chance to sleep with you. Why did you do that? Why did you agree to meet him? I asked. What made you decide to go? I don't know why it seemed so important to me. I knew what he wanted, and I was flattered by his interest, but not enough to have an affair. I dated Barry during our senior year of high school and the summer after. He was my first, and we were intimacy involved for most of that time. The intimacy was thrilling because it was all new to me, but Barry was selfish and arrogant, and by the end of the summer, I realized I didn't love him, so I ended it. He kept insisting I would come back, saying the breakup was only temporary. He said I would always want him because he was my first lover, and women never forget their first. In one of his emails, Barry suggested we should see if there was still magic between us. I felt like he was challenging me, implying that if we met up, I wouldn't be able to resist him. The way he framed it, like we'd have dinner and see what happened, made me want to prove him wrong. I wanted to show him that there was no magic left, that I could spend time with him and not end up in bed with him. I got so caught up in trying to prove him wrong that I lost sight of what truly mattered. You and the kids. I started to ask another question, but Tracy interrupted me. It's 7:15, and we have a 7:30 dinner reservation. You still need to change. We can finish this conversation later. Okay, but what am I supposed to change into? Into my loving husband? I already am, but I didn't bring a change of clothes. I didn't know I needed to, I said. I brought some for you. They're in the closet. Hurry and get ready. I quickly washed up and put on gray dress pants with a navy blazer. When I came out of the bathroom, Tracy was on the phone. Yeah, we're heading to dinner now. Thanks so much for your help, she said. Who was that? I just wanted to call Jackie and let her know everything worked out. It did, didn't it? I guess. But I still think the prank you pulled on me was a bit too harsh, I said. Maybe you're right, and I'm sorry. If I had known you didn't ask Frank to tell those stories about Barry, I would have stopped this last week. Tracy kissed me, and we headed toward the elevators. She spoke as we walked. I'm serious about answering all your questions about what happened. I just hope you learned something from this. If something bothers you, talk to me about it. You know, if you had told me you overheard that first phone call, none of this would have happened. I'm not saying it was all your fault, but I was surprised you didn't act on that information. You're usually so proactive. In hindsight, I knew she was right, but... You're right, I said. I should have acted immediately, but the situation was so emotionally intense that I wasn't thinking clearly. Still, regardless of your reasons, you shouldn't have agreed to meet him that night. When we stepped out of the elevators into the lobby, I stopped Tracy, placed my hands on her shoulders, and turned her to face me. We really messed this up. Let's leave it behind us now, I said. Tracy didn't respond. Instead, she simply took my arm, and we started walking toward the restaurant. Suddenly, she stopped and pulled me in another direction. We can be a little late for our reservation. There's something in one of the meeting rooms down the hall I want to show you, she said. What is it? It's a special sale on golf equipment. I thought you might find something there that I could get you for your birthday, to make up for the lousy trick I played on you. We walked down the hall to the room she was talking about, but the door was closed. Looks like we're too late, I said. I can hear people inside. Try the door, Tracy insisted. The door wasn't locked, and as soon as I opened it, Tracy pushed me into the room. I thought she'd lost her mind, but when I turned to look at her, I noticed the room was full of people. Before I could process what was going on, I heard a loud chorus of "Surprise! Happy birthday!" I was stunned. As I looked around the room, I saw my parents, Tracy's parents, Matthew and Lisa, Jackie and her husband, my boss, and several of our friends. When I turned back to Tracy, she was beaming. She kissed me and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I spent the next 20 minutes mingling around the room, greeting friends, thanking them for coming, and agreeing that I was indeed fortunate to have a wife like Tracy. When we finally sat down at our table with Matthew, Lisa, and our parents, my father raised his wine glass and said, "Happy birthday, son." Everyone at the table clinked their glasses together, even Matthew and Lisa, and then we all took a drink. Tracy only took a small sip of her wine before turning to me, running her fingers through my hair and softly kissing me on the cheek near my ear. "I hope you know how much I love you," she whispered. "I have another surprise for you. I'm pregnant." I turned to see her glowing face. "Really?" I asked. Tracy just nodded. I cupped her face in my hands and kissed her firmly on the lips. "I take it you're happy then?" she asked. "This is a much better gift than those golf clubs would have been."